I want to tell you, black hair is beautiful, and it's versatile, and it just shines. I'm considered to have good hair, but don't call me Becky.
Hey guys, this is Benjamin Boyce. I have more footage for you from Melanie Morgan, who's the representative in Washington's 29th district, legislative district. And she just yesterday advanced a hair discrimination bill, House Bill 2602. So let's just dive in. I'm just going to let you guys hear her argument before I make comment.
My name is Melanie Morgan, and I do represent the 29th legislative district. House Bill 2602 will do two things. One, it will amend the Washington law against discrimination so the term race includes traits historically associated or perceived to be associated with race. Number two, it prohibits discrimination on the basis of hairstyle or texture. I would like to give some context as to why this protection is so vitally needed. During the Reconstruction era, black codes were put into place to retain control over freed slaves and to maintain white supremacy. Some of these codes were so particular that they targeted types of patterns and clothes that black people were allowed to wear, citing them as an effort to help newly freed black people fit in with their new environment. These codes continue to limit the freedom of identity and cultural expression that had been stifled through enslavement. The connection between black codes from the Reconstruction era and the mandated appearance codes that we see in this present day are evident. In order to gain employment, black women have had to assimilate into the white culture. This means we go from naturally curly hair to a sleek, relaxed look of removing all curls. This is unhealthy for our hair, but also dangerous for our skin and breathing in during application. But yet, white women can come to work with purple hair, or they can come with dreads, which also I put a picture in there, and they are not threatened with losing employment or shamed. I'm going to give you a brief history on dreadlocks, or locks for short. Locks are about a spiritual journey that teaches patience. They can be an expression of deep religious or spiritual convictions, or manifestation of ethnic pride. They can make a political statement or simply fashion preference. When white women show up in the place of employment with locks or dreads, most everyone looks at them and says, "Oh, how cute." But black hair, when we show up in dreads and purple hair, we have to change something. We're not assimilating. But I want to tell you, black hair is beautiful, and it's versatile, and it just shines. I'm considered to have good hair, but don't call me Becky. On a social realm, and I mean no harm when I say this, but teachers, coaches, neighbors, friends, please stop touching our hair. We are no longer on the auction block, and we are not a petting zoo. We cannot let discrimination and injustice happen in our state. This is for the New Jersey wrestler, for my community, for me, for our kids. Equity in education and the workplace is for all. And I hope that this committee will take into serious consideration of making a yes vote on moving this bill forward. Thank you, and I'm here to entertain any questions.
Would this affect those employers in Washington State who have standards of hair length and stuff for everyone?
As the staff has reported, any job that requires that is a danger for hair, including white people, because white people have long hair as well. It grows very beautiful. They also have to tie their hair up if they're on an assembly line and put it in a net if they're at a restaurant.
So law enforcement?
Law enforcement would probably follow along because most of them come from the military and they have military standards. So This bill would give people who are Black and African Americans and every other community of color that wants to participate and have employment in those industries would be protected.
Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you.
To summarize that with a couple of thoughts. One, when she's questioned about how will this affect law enforcement, she says that the military's already changed their laws, so the law enforcement will follow suit with the military, and this is to stop discrimination of people, specifically of racial minorities. This one's targeted towards racial minorities. Now, the bill makes exceptions for certain workplaces, but at the same time, it seems like this is just another cog in a litigious grievance culture. And if you look at her narrative, which is the narrative that founds the basis for the Office of Equity, there is this subtle tone of reparations going on, that the Black people, all the disparities and all the difficulties that Black people experience have to do with discrimination, have to do with racism. And the solution is more government interference or intervention, let's just say, into small businesses, into interpersonal relationships, and, you know, I guess where will that lead? To mandatory training, to implicit bias training. Is that a good thing? Is that not a good thing? I am very wary of that kind of thought policing, and as I've shown in previous videos about Melanie Morgan and her cohort, they actually do want to change how people think. They want to change what words mean. And they spend a lot of time and energy fashioning these bills that are just ambiguous enough to get people on board and then entrench themselves into policing situations. So this is another advancement of her basic philosophy that the government is there to make equitable outcomes possible or apparent. And how do they do that? But by redistribution of moral authority, of resources, and of power. And this is another tool of that kind of power. Now, I think it's really easy to see this as a racial issue because it's a racial issue. Like, the phenotype of the Black individual produces certain sorts of hairstyles, and the white phenotype produces other kind of hairstyles, and there will be different cultures that are based on our biology and that grow up around them. And I can see that there's validity in criticizing professionalism as a Eurocentric kind of ideology that imposes norms that affect certain people more than others, that institutes cultures that forces people, implicitly or explicitly, to focus an inordinate, my mouth doesn't want to make that word, that forces people, implicitly or explicitly, to focus a lot of their resources on their appearance, you know, and to try to meet up to a standard. I can see that relaxing standards is kind of a good thing to get everybody to focus on the matter at hand. Now, when the government begins to exert itself into interpersonal relationships, you know, who watches the watchers? If we're going to give the government more and more oversight over our interpersonal relationships, then the cultural aspect, the natural cultural progress of people just relaxing and understanding each other is going to be hindered, because you're going to have the government coming in and forcing people into a state of acceptance. I don't think that a government is efficient in enforcing a cultural norm. I think culture should do that itself. Now, you can definitely say that the Civil Rights Acts were very necessary and are still necessary. Anti-discrimination laws are very necessary, but once we start getting into these fine little details of, like, these microaggressions, then you have people like Melanie Morgan coming in and saying that every time a white girl wears dreads, everybody says that she's cute. Which isn't the case. That's not a case. That's just an assertion there without any proof. And then she uses the opposite example of, but whenever a Black person comes in with dreadlocks, they are shamed, and then they're fearful of their jobs. Maybe there's some data that says that there's disparities in how different people are treated based on their looks, based on their race. But when they go in and start to apply their equity lens, which is based on statistics, and to start to see that there's all these gaps, and then they have this ready-made excuse for every single gap having to do with racism, having to do with history, having to do with these discriminations going on, it leads the way to a lot of resentment and a tightening of the social fabric rather than a loosening of that social fabric. And to not break the metaphor, I don't want a threadbare society. I mean, we need certain sort of strictures around the way that we behave. There needs to be norms. There will always be norms. And if you look at the people who are fighting against the norms. They're trying to impose another norm that they think is better. And I don't think that in the domain of the microaggression, the government needs to be there, and that the government has the tools and the subtlety to actually do anything but harm race relations, for instance.